Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is your program, bringing news, views, information, analysis, and today, some really good discussion on religious liberty events. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty magazine, and my guest on the program is attorney Alan Reinach, executive director of the California Church-State Council, and a repeat guest on this program, I should say,
and glad to have you on my radio show once in a while.
Yes, that's what I was fishing for. We work together on many things.
Sure.
You're on my radio program and I'm on yours.
Freedom's ring for shameless
and I depend on you
here.
and your organization to promote Liberty magazine, so it's as incestuous as it gets in the good cause. Let's talk about something that's equally as disputatious as what we just said. We live in an era, I think, where it's hard to know what is the truth. You know, doesn't the Bible say something about ever learning and never arriving at the truth?
True.
And unless you have spiritual insight, I think it's becoming very much a fact that today you can read and you go online and you can fill your head full of lizard people news and this and that and the other, and what is true anymore? There's some very good online sites about the flat Earth, and the latest, we were just talking before the filming about aeroplanes. I should have you know that there's some serious people online that are quite convinced the planes run on nothing but air, that they're just going through the motions to fill it with gas, that it runs on compressed air, and that they levitate.
You know, without embarrassing people I'm close to, there are those that I know in my sphere who believe in the Loch Ness Monster, who believe that the moon landing never occurred.
Right.
You know, of course, aliens, that's an easy one.
Right. So the irony is this is happening in the context of increased education or access to education by people, not just in the US, but in most of the world, comparative to what it used to be. There are all sorts of news outlets, not just the internet. But people seem divorced from truth in an unprecedented manner. And in the United States now, we're living through a period where it's being publicly said, fake news. And of course, it's depends on who's making the claim as to what's fake. But the net effect is I don't think people are quite sure about anything anymore.
Well, you know, if we can trace it back just a step or two, postmodernism is really defined by a shift away from the logic and the reason that were kind of the center of the Enlightenment, and a shift towards experience. Yeah. Well,
if it's true we've had a public figure saying it, I believe it's true, therefore it's true. If I think it's true, that makes it true.
Well, and
that's my reality.
What was Rudy Giuliani's statement? You know, there is no truth.
Yeah.
Isn't that what he said?
Something to that effect. And of course, we're back to Pilate. You know, what is truth? I mean, philosophically, it's always been the question. But truth in the sense of hard news and information about things that are happening around us, I don't think it's ever been as unclear in people's minds as now.
The problem is that we're all filtering out everything through the spin doctors. And so whether you're a conservative or you're a liberal, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a secular person, you know, you have your sources, and we're increasingly narrow in what we're exposed to. Either you're in the Fox News camp or you're in the MSNBC
well, you know, I don't
camp.
claim to be a conservative or a liberal in a
Well, you're more widely exposed to both sides than most people.
I will make this statement because I know it is a fact of history. Fox Network comes by way of a man that once was an Australian, Murdoch. He's taken out American citizenship. Right. But I mean, his whole career started in Australia.
Sure.
And he had the Fox Network there. And the whole thing began not as news, but as biased entertainment. It's highly structured for a certain viewpoint. It used to make no pretense at giving you general information or a balanced view on anything. And those that don't agree with the Fox network know that's still to be true in the US, but many others take it as fact, and it's very unfortunate. And they're not the only ones, but I think they're Exhibit A. And the reason I mention it, it's Exhibit A. It was intended to be that way. It never was set up to give you open facts. It was a biased, narrow, packaged set of information for entertainment as much as anything.
Well,
but that's been writ large in our whole communications.
That certainly was what Rush Limbaugh.
Same thing with Rush Limbaugh.
You know, he excelled at entertainment. Whatever you think of his perspective, you know, he was he is, I think, still very popular, very entertaining.
And I think for quite a while now, the US populace in particular have been manipulated by what passes for news, and it's not escaped me. I read a lot of articles, and any number of public officials I have picked up at different times have been reading and studying Goebbels and the modern advent of propaganda techniques. So, I mean, well, I'm not trying to invoke Nazism, but Nazism put into practice modern concepts of manipulating groupthink.
You know, what I would say to both liberals and conservatives, Lincoln, is beware anytime somebody is peddling fear. Fear is one of the most powerful political tools in the arsenal. And so much of what we see in our political discourse is be afraid, be very afraid. Whether it's Christians saying, be afraid of the gays, you know, they're the boogeyman, they're coming to get you. Or it's the liberals saying, be afraid of those rabid fundamentalists, they're coming to get you. You know, be very concerned when people are peddling fear. Because the next thing they're doing is they're reaching into your pocketbook and they're raiding your wallet.
Well, as far as the fundraiser. But, you know, when we talk about information, you have to talk about the press, the role of the press in a democratically instituted system of government. And it's got a long history. I don't know if you know about this, but I've got a book that I really enjoyed about the American Aurora. You know about that?
I don't.
It was Franklin's son-in-law was the editor of it.
Okay.
It was a very influential paper in the early American experiment, and it largely was responsible for Adams, the first President Adams, bringing in the Alien and Sedition Act.
Oh, really?
As an effort to put down what this newspaper was saying. And it's been interesting for me.
Attacks on the press are part of our
That's what I'm trying to bring up.
Culture.
The press has always had somewhat of an antagonistic relationship to those in power. And the press has always, in spite of what we've heard now, been a mixed bag.
We call it the fourth estate.
Right.
It is absolutely essential. Look, our founding fathers believed that it was necessary to have an educated populace, educated voters. That's why originally, you know, only landed men could vote. They were the only ones who felt were educated enough and responsible enough to exercise the vote.
There's a half-truth in that.
If
people are not informed, the votes can skew toward despotism very easily.
Sure. So it's very important to have people educated. It's very important for us to educate ourselves and to exercise our rights as citizens to vote. Even, you know, we think so often, well, my vote doesn't count. I live in California. I know that my vote for president doesn't count
not
because,
directly.
You know,
but in the aggregate
system,
it does because the US has a very low voting rate, and they sniff a bit at Australia where I grew up, but in Australia everybody votes. It's required. The penalty's not very high. It's like less than a speeding ticket, but it tends to make everybody vote, so you get a reflective decision of the whole population. It's not true in the US.
No.
It's a distinct minority.
Well, I remember,
put someone in office.
George Carlin, you know, the comedian, you know, saying, "Don't blame me, I didn't vote." Well, no, you are to blame if you didn't vote.
Well, I'm going to put myself into it now, but to make another point. As I mentioned, in Australia, you're required to vote. But there's long been a religious exemption. And I used to get the fine notice, and I would just write, I have religious principles why I didn't vote, and they dismiss it. So it's not a despotism in that sense, but I like the idea of requiring full participation.
Well, I rather think that if you are religious, you should take your
That's what
obligations
I'm running the gauntlet of your opinion on this.
You know, but no, my point is, look, a free press is absolutely essential to,
I believe so.
To a free and democratic society. We've got to have a free press.
And it's not necessary that the press be always honest or nonpartisan. As long as you've got a waterfront of press opinions, then knowledgeable reading people can read this and make up their mind.
Look,
at the moment, the idea is being promulgated that if they're presenting fake news, which you can argue that they're not allowed in our society. I mean, the idea that the press should only say what the powers that be like, that again, that leads you to a bad point.
I'm going to give you a definition of fake news. Fake news is anybody's story or perspective
that you don't agree with.
That you don't agree with. It's fake news.
Yeah.
Come on.
But I'll throw in something else that I've observed, and I think it's very bad. The whole Western economy has shifted in recent years with the different economic collapses and so on. You know, I edit a magazine. Print is in trouble.
Right.
Not Liberty, I hope, because it's a targeted magazine towards certain people that they're not going to see it otherwise. It's given to them, to the legislators and thought leaders and so on. But the whole media apparatus is suffering, whether it's print, you know, people don't read like they used to, and if it's television, you know, it's the internet or some other way. They don't necessarily watch formal network TV anymore. And their budgets are dropping like a stone. And what's that agency with the Christian Science Monitor? Right, gone. That used to be one of the biggest news outlets, their news service. And I've noticed all of them are going down to the point where they basically just bucket brigade what they're given by the authorities. You and I go to different government events, and there's always a handout at the door in Washington, and I get that handout, and I can guarantee the next day I read in the newspaper a report of that event, and it's word for word what they're given. So we don't have investigative journalism like we used to. We don't have the tough questions being asked. And this is the great irony. If there's anything fake about the news, it's what the power brokers want everyone else to know. It's just superficial, simple stuff.
Well,
I'd rather go back to where the press is worrying and troubling and going and asking the hired help in the wealthy man's home, what's going on here? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sounds like the National Enquirer a bit, but that's another story.
Well, you know, I do think that investigative journalism has suffered, but I think there's some wonderful investigative journalism that's still being done.
Some, but the phenomenon has shifted. I'm talking about in the aggregate. There's always particular exceptions.
You know, but we in America have another very basic problem here, Lincoln, which is that we have virtually no memory. We have no historical memory. We are the new world, and everything is new, and everything is grand.
The education system.
You know, and so our ability to put things in context and to see what's happening in context, you know, I have tried to instill in my kids, if you want to, if you want to be part of shaping the nation, shaping the future, you have to have a grasp of history, because otherwise you're just reacting and you don't have a context to be deliberate about, well, where are we going and how do we understand modern society?
And you've heard me in full cry, even when we're talking about religious history and the origins of religious liberty and Protestantism and so on. When you learn US history for that, it starts with the Mayflower Pilgrims and there's nothing before. You have to know antecedents to understand the present. So I agree with you absolutely. We need to take a break now. We'll be back shortly to continue this interesting discussion of what role the press plays and could play and should play in our freedoms. Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break, we were both singing a strong song about the need of investigative journalism and a free press, and its role not just in civil liberties generally, but the greatest liberty, religious freedom.
Well, it's not really an accident of history, Lincoln, that we have a bundle of rights in the First Amendment. We have no establishment of religion, free exercise of religion, free speech, free press, and the right of people to petition for redress of grievances and assembly. All of these rights are bundled together in one sentence, in one amendment. And if you think about it, what are we doing here? We're exercising both religious freedom, free speech, free press, all in one fell swoop by recording this program.
Yeah, you really can't divide these liberties up too much. And it's been said, even by one of our Liberty Dinner speakers, that religious liberty is pretty much a litmus test for all the civil liberties.
It is,
but
absolutely.
You could turn it around a little bit. If you don't have freedom of the press, you're not likely to have freedom of religion.
Well, that's true too.
So they exist together. And even as you were reiterating them, it played into my burden that we need to understand the stream of history. They go back to the Magna Carta.
Well, and look, I think we Americans are rather complacent about the state of our liberties, and they can be lost very quickly. Anthony Lewis wrote the definitive book, Freedom for the Speech We Hate. And when you look at the history of free speech in this country, free speech has not been very well protected.
But worse, I want to add something. You can lose it and not know you've lost it. There's a poem that I love, and the line just popped in my mind by Dylan Thomas. And he says at the end, he says, "Though I sang in my chains like the sea." We can sing about from sea to shining sea and the great liberties, but maybe to an onlooker in another country, it's not such a, I'm not saying it's so, but it could be where it's not such a free country anymore.
Well, look, that's, my quip has been,
judgment
in America, we're only free as long as we're irrelevant. As long as the powers that be don't care about, what you're doing and what you're saying, yeah, you're free to say whatever you want. But if you become a threat, if you become sufficiently influential that you're taken seriously, watch out. Somebody's going to try to take you down.
Yeah, and that may not be because there's anything structurally changed, but it's the dynamic of forces that using the existing system can restrict you. It's always been so.
Sure.
And money and large organizations have long trod on individual freedoms. But that's part of the reason we're pushing back.
One of the things that I say about bias in the press, and like you, I read widely. Well, first of all, bias is not a bad thing. The role of the press is to criticize the existing powers that be. The press is not doing its job if it's just a rubber stamp and going rah-rah to who's ever in power. It has to be finding fault. That's its job. That's what we need it to do. If you're looking for bias, look at why the story is being told. Not, oh, this story is full of false facts or it's fake news. No, the story is likely, in the responsible journalism, they have very good fact checkers and editorial
That's one of the
policies
roles of the editor to check the facts.
And what have you, and they're very careful. The major New York Times, Post, and the major magazines and all are very good at making sure that they get their facts straight. The question is, why are they telling this story? Why did they choose this story rather than a different story? That's where you'll see elements of bias come in.
But a lot of what is happening now is not just bias, it's almost not fake in the sense, but it's a narrative that's based on some lies, basically. There are stories that it's made up. Not all the facts, but the premise is a made-up premise, and then convenient facts have been accumulated to tell it. And since we spoke about it before, Fox will do that. And I watch Fox. I have no burden against them. To me, it's entertainment. It tells me what other groups are saying. But I've been watching on some of the recent developments that it's particularly worse on the discussion groups. I see them discuss, and then I turn on one of any other channels. And it's like, are they talking about the same real events that I know are happening?
But this gets us to our core concept.
And perhaps it just hit me. Perhaps a big problem in the U.S. is confusing news with entertainment.
Well,
we want to be titillated, not informed.
But this is a problem that goes back decades, where You know, in order for television news, for example, to survive, it has to get the ratings, and it's all about the ratings. And to get the ratings, you have to entertain. So what entertains? You know, the latest, you know, car crash or, you know, some disaster. And so the thing, look, it's a matter of public record that Donald Trump received something like $1 billion worth of free media coverage during the election campaign. That unquestionably was a huge contribution to his political success. Now, why did he get all that press coverage? Because he was entertaining.
He was interesting, yes.
Okay? He was more entertaining than, you know, George Bush or Marco Rubio or, you know, any one of a number of other people who, you know, arguably were more experienced politically and may have been better qualified. You know,
but the focus is on arguably.
I'm trying to be
it's just the facts,
courteous, you know, but look, I'm not
doesn't
trying...
mean the president was incompetent or is. That's irrelevant.
I'm
but he was not a politician.
Sides.
He was
right,
not a
no,
politician.
He was not a politician.
So I mean, they were experienced. Yeah.
So, you know, I think the media is undergoing some self-criticism, certainly, but it brings us back to our core question of, you know, how do we understand truth in a postmodern age when everything that goes on around us, we're having a hard time getting to the actual facts because of the spin. And we're not even willing, most of us, to listen to facts that conflict with our preconceived ideas. And that's a real problem.
Yes, but I was about to say what I do, and I hope other people do, when I listen to anything, there's not just news or read a book, I read facts and figures, I run it past the ones that I already know, that I've verified in my own mind. I'm fact-checking. Don't you do that when you read?
Well...
But if you don't have the background knowledge or have never tried to acquire it, how would someone today know up from down? And it does strike me, the Bible over and over again says that the very elect will be deceived at the end of time. And this has to be part of this dynamic. Well, you can't believe your eyes. And of course, videos can be manipulated, not just words, you know, and there's some joke things that I've seen online where they'll have public figures saying something grotesque, and you can micro-edit video and sound. So quite literally, most people know now what you see isn't what you get. It can be manipulated in gross ways, not routinely, but there's always that possibility. And without knowledge to compare to what they're seeing, I think people are not critical thinkers in the large. Of course, there's wonderful exceptions. But overall, modern society, and in particular the United States, is one of the most modern countries, is in a bad situation.
I do a mini evangelistic series based on prophecy, and at the beginning, one of my premises is to tell people the problem is not that you're skeptical, it's that you're not skeptical enough. Because, as you quoted from Jesus at the end of time, even the very elect will be subject to deception. Yeah. And I think one of the elements that is very dangerous for us as Christians, we're very law and order oriented. So, for example, there's a lot of current controversy over American immigration policies. I'm not going to get into the substance of it, but what I see from conservative Christians is very one-sided approach to the issue. It's law. Yeah. You know, if this is what the law is, and either you're on the right side of it, and there's so many dimensions.
And it seems to me you can still respect the government as the lawgiver, and it's chosen to have this law for whatever reason, but we can morally object to how it's applied. Well, if people are being mistreated in the name of that law, we object to the mistreatment. That's not ever to be acceptable to a Christian.
Well, and certainly there's a lot of dimensions to the whole immigration issue. Why are people fleeing? What are the social issues?
Many
What's the geopolitical? What has the United States influence been in Mexico and Central America? What about, you know, the drug problem? This is a push and pull. You know, it's American demand that
But talking about facts, we need another program. The facts are more people are leaving than are coming in at the moment.
Ah, yes. Well, there's that too. But freedom of the press is so central to religious freedom, and frankly, I fear for our ability to really see what is truth and to grasp reality.
Standing before Governor Pilate, Jesus calmly and in a dignified way, in spite of the blood and the gore dripping down his forehead, said, I am the way, the life, and the truth. And Pilate said, what is truth? Most people that read that just think of it's a narrative, but he was asking a deeply philosophical question. And I believe in many ways in our modern world we're seeing the demise of truth, or at least an understanding of it. Is the media telling us the truth? Can we find the truth? Would we know it if we found it? I think unless one realizes that God's way is the only way to truth, that he is indeed the epitome of truth, and we seek him, and like Solomon, an understanding of his way and the ability to define between truth and error, light and dark, we'll be lost. We will go into a moral and intellectual darkness. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.